Hello, this is James Ferry, instructor for English 110, Intro to Literature. And what I actually want to do today is look at an excerpt from a short story or a poem, depending on who you talk to, by the author Jamaica Kincaid, and it's called Girl. But before we do that, I thought we'd take a really quick look at this handout I put together on critical thinking, because what I want to do is run a critical thinking exercise on that excerpt. Critical thinking is a fundamental skill for college. No matter what your major is, your professors are going to want you to consider what you believe to be the truth and the best way of going about doing or accomplishing what you want to accomplish. Um, in fact, it might not be hyperbolic to say that critical thinking is the entire point of college. So it's very important. We're going to run this excerpt through 5 stages of critical thinking. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to summarize it. We're going to read through it and just get a big picture idea of what's going on. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take a closer look. We're going to analyze it, break it down to its component parts, and try to get an idea of how these little micro pieces are fitting into the whole. Then we're going to see what kind of inferences we can draw based on what we have to work with. Maybe just a sort of like a preliminary evaluation based on having broken it down. Then we're going to synthesize, we're going to put all those pieces back together, and we're going to step back again, and we're going to take a look at the whole in a little bit greater depth and see if we can get an idea of what's going on, big picture, post-analysis. Finally, we're going to make our evaluation. Okay, we're going to ask ourselves, what do we think of this piece? What do we think is going on? Do we think it's working? And what can we make of it in the final analysis? So, without further ado, let's take a look at that excerpt. Hello, welcome back to Critical Thinking with James Ferry. Okay, let's see how succinctly we can do this. Now, this is our excerpt here, and we're going to apply these 5 steps of critical thinking to it. And one thing I wanted to mention before we do, though, is the way this is laid out, the way I'm presenting it to you, it would seem that these steps are all very kind of linear, and you have to progress this way, and you have to. It's very sort of chronological. It's not really the case. These are more relational. Okay, it does make sense to move in this order, but these steps are really kind of they inform and they influence each other in a sort of a recursive way. They build on each other, so to speak, and I think that'll make sense as we go along. But first, we'll just read it, and then we'll subject it to our exercise. Quote: "Wash the white clothes on Monday and put them on the stone heap. Wash the color clothes on Tuesday and put them on the clothesline to dry. Don't walk barefoot in the hot sun. Cook pumpkin fritters in a very hot sweet oil. Soak your little cloths right after you take them off. When buying cotton to make yourself a nice blouse, be sure that it doesn't have gum in it, because that way it won't hold up well after a wash. Soak saltfish overnight before you cook it. Is it true that you sing Benna in Sunday school?" So very interesting little excerpt. Kind of mysterious, taken out of context, but there's a lot going on in there. And I think we can draw some pretty interesting conclusions, actually. So summarizing it, basically just a laundry list of precepts or instructions, maybe from a pupil to an instructor to a pupil, mother to a daughter, that kind of thing. At first blush, just a series of instructions having to do with domesticity. Okay, that's all we need for a summary. Analyzing it, though, we're going to look at it a little bit closer and focus on some micro details. Now, there's some interesting verbiage here. We've got stone heap, which you don't usually hear somebody talk about a stone heap. Pumpkin fritters. Somebody making a blouse by hand and putting gum or not putting gum in it. That's a little unusual. We've got this word Benna, which admittedly I didn't know before I Googled it. So we've got some unusual language in here, and another thing I want to point out is this is all one sentence. It's strung together with semicolons, a series of clauses really that could have technically been their own sentences, but the author made a formal choice to string them together with semicolons. So we have to assume that that's not arbitrary. So looking at it, and again, segueing, bleeding into the inferences phase, I think we can make an initial inference that this is probably written by somebody from a different culture. Now, I should point out we do have some extra textual or paratextual information here. So Jamaica Kincaid kind of gives it away. And we can kind of, and the fact that it's titled Girl kind of gives the part away about the auditor probably being a young girl. The recipient of this information is obviously a young girl, which would probably mean that the speaker is the matriarch or a older woman, probably the mother. Other inferences we can draw, again, these are the duties that are probably required of this young woman as she moves into, as she grows up. We can infer that both actors are female. We can safely assume, I think, that the interrogative at the end implies something sort of interesting. This word bena, if we look it up, we find out it has to do with calypso music. So assuming the mother wants the daughter, assuming it's a mother-daughter, to do all these things, this last one, though, is a little bit questionable. It would seem that she wouldn't want her to sing bena music in Sunday school. My sense is that calypso music is probably a faux pas in terms of Sunday school. So again, it's a directive, it's a admonishment, but it's do all these, but don't do this one, okay? And that's the inferences that I draw from it anyways. Now, stepping back and pulling back and trying to see it anew post-analysis, what we appear to have is, it's probably a fictional piece written by, again, a foreign author, or foreign to us at least. Nothing in its own context can be said to be foreign. Who would be depicting a scene between probably a mother and daughter that seems kind of confrontational. The lecturer is apparently not flexible on these precepts. They're not subject to negotiation. And we can sort of assume that the mother probably has the daughter's best interest in mind. You know, different cultures have their own version of this kind of thing. In the Hispanic culture, they have what's called the quinceañera, where the young woman grows into, I guess, womanhood, and they have a celebration for that, probably about the same age. Where I come from in Massachusetts, we have a lot of people here whose ancestors came over on the Mayflower, and they have what are called debutante balls, whereby the young lady, again, the same age, is this is her party, and this is her way of indoctrinating her into social society, whereby she must now comport herself as a proper young lady, you know, and hold her tea properly with the pinky in the air, and you know, she knows how to behave herself when a gentleman caller comes over and that kind of thing. So this is not all that unusual, and this seems very specific to a specific culture. Again, we have this paratextual information, so we can assume this is taking place somewhere in the West Indies, Jamaica, the Caribbean, that kind of place. And we can assume that the young girl is probably taking the information in. She's not speaking. Maybe she's sort of placating the speaker. Moving into the evaluating phase, and taking things into consideration, ordinarily we'd be asking ourselves, does this piece work? And maybe we'd be evaluating our own work or somebody else's work in the form of a peer review, but in this case we're evaluating a published piece from which we only have an excerpt. So we don't really know if this is working in the greater whole, okay? But that doesn't mean we can't make an evaluation. My evaluation is I'm detecting some irony here, okay? And by that I mean, you know, when most people say, you know, that's ironic, they put in the context of, you know, oh, I was just going to call you, you called me, that's ironic. Well, that's not really what irony is. What irony is the literal depiction here, the literal rendition, is in some kind of discord with the actual situation that's taking place. What I think is probably happening is the speaker has probably broken all of these rules herself as a young girl, and that's probably why she knows them so well. And this is very much a ritual. Like she has to say, this is her duty to impart this information upon the younger generation, whose duty it is to listen or to placate at least. Yeah, it reminds me of my grandmother actually, who used to rally her grandchildren, me and my cousins and my brothers, and very much like this, sort of impart very kind of old-timey, out of date, often absurd precepts. And we were supposed to sit there and listen. And she sort of wanted to be taken seriously, but kind of knew she wasn't being taken seriously. And we kind of pretended to take her seriously while giving off the vibe that we weren't. So it was one of those, we know that you know that we know that you know kind of thing. And it's really basically just a ritual that just gets handed down. And I think that's why it's strung together in one long sentence with these semicolons, because it's just this thing that's going to go on. And the young girl will probably pass it on to her daughter after having broken all these rules herself, and it goes on from there. That's my evaluation of the piece, and I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you'll make your own. I'd love to see your comments in the discussion forums, and we'll see you next time.